Welcome to the Far Hill Speaker Series. On behalf of the Wright Memorial Public Library and the Oakwood Historical Society, we are pleased to present the third and final presentation of our series on Dayton in World War II. My name is Lee Turbin, and I'm the president of the Oakwood Historical Society. As World War II rolled out across the Atlantic, a flurry of war-related activity played out right here in Dayton. From code breakers to top secret laboratories to Russian spies, the Dayton region's influence on World War II was indisputable. Today, we are pleased to introduce the third and last presentation of our World War II trilogy, The Russian Spy in the Dayton, Manhattan Project. You will learn about George Koval, the American-born spy who gave secrets about the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union, and how his posthumous award by Putin led to his discovery. Our presenter is Don B. Sullinger, PhD. Dr. Sullinger holds an AB in chemistry from the University of Colorado and a PhD with a physical chemistry major from Cornell University. He worked at the Mound from 1962 to 1992. Don is a trustee and past president of the Mound Museum Association. And now, the Russian spy in the Dayton, Manhattan Project.
Ed Roach, who was a historian at the Dayton Aviation Historical Group we had here, and I were surprised when we opened our internet and found out this story on the first page of the New York Times. It's entitled A Spy's Path, Iowa to A-Bomb to Kremlin Honor. This was in November the 12th, 2007. We tried to get local news people interested in this. We wrote emails to the Dayton Daily News, the TV station, the radio station, and we didn't get much return from this. No, it seemed to be ignored story. We thought this was an important story because it involved, if you read the story, it involved the Dayton Project. And so we sort of mulled over what to do about this and kept following it. A couple of years later, there was a story in the Smithsonian magazine. It was May 2009, and it fleshed out some of the information, but it was basically the same story that had appeared in the New York Times edition in 2007. And the George Koval atomic spy was unmasked. They gave more details about his life and his family life and so forth, but it was essentially the same story. Now, so we decided that we'd try again, and finally I said, well, I'll give a talk on this. We've been following this, and so we told among others, Jim DeBross, who was a reporter of the Dayton Daily News, we were going to do this talk. So he did interview both Ed and myself, and he did some background searching, and he even found that the Dayton Directory of 1946, which is the time this event occurred here in Dayton, he found out that there was a Dayton directory that listed George Koval as a Monsanto chemist who lived in West Oakwood. So he decided to show, he came to the talk I gave at the Mound Museum. We had monthly, we've had monthly technical talks at the museum for some number of years now. And so he showed up at this, and also TV2 showed up, and they interviewed me and some of the audience. So we got some notoriety out of it then, and they did pay a little more attention to this. But still, it faded in the background. Very few people. I don't know if they didn't believe the story or not, but it didn't seem to really make much effect on the locality here or anyone else. Even people we ran into otherwise the Atomic Energy Commission didn't seem to pay much attention to this. There were some denials from Oak Ridge because he was also associated with Oak Ridge in this story. But that was about all the story evoked. Well, anyhow, Ed now is not here in Dayton. He went to the headquarters of the National Park Service and regional headquarters, which is in Omaha, Nebraska, and is not with us anymore. Once in a while I get an email from him, but we've followed this story rather carefully, and there are bits and pieces, but essentially the story has stayed the same. So what I'm going to do today is to try to give the current account as we know the story. Well, it started when Abraham Koval and his wife Shinitsky Koval, who were both Jewish, and one escaped the very severe anti-Semitic Tsarist regime of their day. And in 1910, they immigrated to the United States. They came to Sioux City, Iowa. Sioux City was kind of an interesting city at that time. It had about 48,000 people, which is a fairly sizable city for being that far out on the Louisiana Purchase. And they saw themselves as being a very cosmopolitan city, and in fact they had quite a wide variety of people, particularly from Eastern Europe, and they saw themselves as being in competition with Chicago and St. Louis to be sort of the capital of the new Louisiana Purchase, or it wasn't new then, but by that time. So they had around 48,000 people. Chicago had 100,000 people approximately. And now they have about 85,000, so they haven't kept up with the growth of Chicago in any respect. Anyhow, the Kovals settled in Sioux City, and they had 3 sons. Isaiah, who was born on August 22nd in 1912. George, we'll be interested in, was born on Christmas Day in 1913. Gabriel, a third son, was born on the 25th of January in 1919. The slide here shows a picture of the 3 Koval brothers with some of their friends in Sioux City in the mid-1930s. George is circled with a red circle to point him out. His other 2 brothers are with him, and they're some of the friends of the neighborhood. This is a picture called the Castle on the Hill. This was the high school where they all graduated. And as you can see, and it was a prevalent building of the day, it looks more like a fortress than it does a school. It's a sort of a tannish gray sandstone building, and it's still standing, and it's been converted into an apartment building, but there's still a suite of rooms that have been saved there and have made a museum. And part of it now has, they had to add, after this story broke, had to add some more information on Koval because he wasn't even included in this. Here's a picture of the student annual called Maroon and White. That was the colors of the school. And it shows George. He was a general course student, and they tell a little about him very briefly as they do in these books. And he was his main activity was Interscholastic Debate Society, and they have a typical quotation. They said, "A mighty man is he." That's the quotation they gave to him. And aim of the course was to always seek the truth. And the light of his act is kind of interesting. This is a picture of the 1929 debate, Scholastic Debate Society. And he's the one in the middle here with the glasses. He was a very good debater. He liked that. He was an excellent student. In fact, he was by far the youngest student in his class. He was only 15 when he graduated from high school. And apparently they let you, if you could do the work, they let you advance pretty easily. You don't do that very much anymore, but in that day they did. The other thing that he's known for from early childhood is he loved baseball. And he was a very good baseball player. He played a really wicked shortstop, so that always won him over with everyone, is that his love of baseball. And this picture here, along with the story about his graduation, they show him batting fungos out behind the high school. When he graduated, he went to the university. He entered the University of Iowa, which was not too far away from where he was raised. And the 1932 yearbook picture shows him, and he's circled with a red circle. He's an electrical engineering major in Iowa. He went 2.5 years as an electrical engineer. Then about this time, the Depression hit this nation and the world as a whole, but particularly the Midwest seemed to be hit very hard. And so the Kovals faced a lot of problems financially, and they decided that, they'd tried capitalism to get away from Tsarist Russia. They would take up Stalin, who had just recently set up this autonomous republic supposedly in eastern Siberia. So they went to this autonomous region, USSR, in 1932, and they settled they went on a family passport and settled in Birobidzhan, which is the capital of this autonomous republic. The picture here shows the families, Abraham and his wife Ethel, and George and his two brothers, all in a passport photo. They don't seem to do passports like this anymore either, but they showed them all as a family unit in the passport. And they ended up here, and this map shows Birobidzhan was 3,700 miles east of Moscow. They wanted to go back to the Moscow area, but anyhow, they took this as an opportunity to go back and to try out socialism as a new life. The Jewish Autonomous Region was set up in competition in Russia. This is a Stalinist movement as an opposition to the Zionist movement in England, where they were trying to resettle many Jews into Palestine at the time. But it was located in eastern Siberia. Like I said, it's about 3,700 miles east of Moscow. Birobidzhan, it was the capital of the region. And from mid-1920s to mid-1930s, there was about 1,000 foreign Jews that went there. They were lured there by the ideal of wanting to work the land and to build socialism for the world. And by 1939, this region had increased, had about 109,000 people, and some 20,000 of those were Jews. Here's a picture of the main square in Birobidzhan. When they got back there, George improved his Russian language skill. He didn't know Russian very well, so he was raised in America. And he increased his Russian language skill and entered the Mendeleev Institute, of Chemical Technology in Moscow in 1934. He majored in chemistry, and he was a very good student, as always. He graduated with honors from there, and he, one, having met and married a fellow student, and B, he had received Soviet citizenship. See, he was an American citizen. He wasn't a Soviet citizen until he got this added to his roster. He was recruited then shortly thereafter he graduated by the GRU. That's the Soviet Military Secret Service after his graduation. And he entered in CTI, which is, and specialized in the technology of inorganic substances. And he was seeking a chemistry degree. He graduated with high honors, and he specialized in the technology of inorganic substances. There's a picture of him with his wife. And there's a couple of pictures here of around in the 1930s. One is a skiing picture, and another is a summer picture. It looks like he's been swimming with some of his friends. Well, he disappeared from Moscow about this time, ostensibly into the military service. Actually, he was going into training with the GRU. Next note of his activities, he arrived in San Francisco in October of 1940 with the code name Delmar, and he had a contact named Clyde. And he made his way to New York, and the Raven Electric Company, which was a supplier, one of the many kinds of small suppliers for electrical firms like General Electric. And this was a cover employer. Actually, he became second in command of the GRU unit in New York. The draft had been instituted in 1940, so he was subject to that. He was given a cover story about having gotten a degree at a small community college and was an orphan, so they wouldn't have to say anything much about his relatives. So anyhow, the Raven Electric Company got him a couple of deferments for about a year, but then they decided he might be more valuable in the Army. So he was drafted into the Army in February the 4th of 1943. He did basic training at Fort Dix in New Jersey, and then went to the Citadel in South Carolina for a while. And while he was there, he was selected for the Army Specialized Training Program, which was a program the Army set up to try to identify and to bring together groups who had technical skills and training, and he qualified for this. So he was sent with a unit of the SPTC, the Special Program and Training Command, to CCNY in New York. People called CCNY at the time, it was called Poor Man's Harvard, because there's very bright people at CCNY, and most of them are quite poor. It's quite a different thing than getting into Harvard. At CCNY, he was very popular. There was about a group of about 20 there, and they studied radiation training because the military saw a need for training people on radioactivity of various things. And of course, they had in the background that the general public didn't know, this big program going on that led into the Manhattan Project that involved great depths of radiation. So anyhow, he went to CCNY, and it didn't dawn on anybody there. He was very popular. Everyone liked him. He was very friendly. And they liked the way he played baseball. That was always an interesting. And here's a picture of him with his group, and there was a gentleman named Arnold Kramish who later became sort of an authority on on espionage, and particularly military espionage during the Cold War. And he was at this unit with Koval at CCNY, and they became very good friends. But if they'd stopped to think, he was about 10 years older than everyone else here. He also, even though his cover story said he was an orphan who was raised in New York, his accent wasn't a New York accent. He really had a Midwestern accent. But he seemed to get by with us. No one seemed to question us, anyhow, at that time. And one of the things, he always had a girlfriend with him. And the thing is, on these dates, he always took them to baseball games. He knew all the batting averages and the earned run averages, the pitchers and everything. He knew a lot about it and was a good ball player. That was, and this is mentioned very prominently in his FBI file. Here's a picture of his departure group that they left CCNY, and there's about 20 of them. They went to Oak Ridge. They were assigned to Oak Ridge in mid-1944 in a special engineering detachment, which is SED, Special Engineering Detachment. He became a health physicist. And as a health physicist, he had a top secret clearance, his own Jeep, and access to nearly all the production facilities at Oak Ridge. So he had access to almost the whole place. He was there about a year, and then he was promoted to a sergeant, and he was a staff sergeant, the lowest rank of sergeant, and he was transferred about this time at a request from people at the Dayton project that they needed some help with developing a health physics program. And so he was transferred to Dayton project as a health physics group leader. And he was assigned to Unit 3, which is the bone break seminary. I won't go into this much because supposedly this has been covered by the previous talk by, on the Dayton project. He got to the Dayton in about June 1945, and July 16th was the date of the Trinity test of the implosion plutonium-based weapon in Alamogordo, New Mexico. So he got here just in time when they developed the trigger at the Dayton lab and also the bomb. So that things were working well, and now they were ready to go into real production on it. So August the 6th, then there was 3 weeks later, there was the Hiroshima bombing, or the uranium-based bomb, and then 3 days later, the Nagasaki bomb, which is a plutonium-based bomb with the implosion device. Both of these had triggers that were made from polonium that was done at the Dayton project. So he was right at the right place to find out about this after the problems had been solved and they were ready to really use them. So on the 14th of August, then Japan surrendered. And in October of '46, the CIA estimated, well, they said, we can't keep this a secret. A lot of the fact that we use this bomb indicates a lot of things. So they estimated the USSR would be able to produce a bomb in about somewhere between 1950 and 1953. But on August 29, 1949, somewhat before, the Soviets detonated a plutonium-based weapon at their Kazakh site. And I'll show you a little later that this was almost completely a copy of our plutonium-based bomb. There's a picture of the Unit 3 where Koval worked. He was the group leader for health physics there. And then a picture of I went with my son Mark. We went down there to see this. We were going to meet later on, some years later. We were going to meet this reporter Jim DeBras from the Times, and it didn't come off. So they came out to the nursing home where my another son was at that time and met me. But anyhow, we went, and here's a picture of the house that where he actually lived. It was in the it's just on Grand Avenue in western Dayton. And it's one of them that's in the area where it's actually probably looks much better than it did when he lived there, because one of them has been sort of resurrected. And he worked about 10 blocks or so away, so we even drew a map and figured this would be the way he would walk to work. There are accounts in the FBI file of his doing this, so that I agree with. Here's a group photograph of the Dayton project staff. About 100 of these. There were about 300 people there in its maximum employment. But this picture is about 100 people they got, and it shows a couple of people away from him, a couple of rows down is the head of the laboratory. So Koval was right among the group. And here's a picture of the Little Joe atomic bomb as it went off. And there's some direct Dayton evidence we found. One, Ed Roach had the opportunity to go to Atlanta and visit the Thomas family. Charles Thomas was head of the Monsanto Dayton project. His son is now sort of titular head of the family, and they have an archive of, well, there's one at Washington University in St. Louis, and there's another one that's a family archive in Atlanta. Ed Roach was able to see this, and he says he knows and sent me a copy of the letter that Thomas wrote to Colonel Stafford Warren. This was in February 1945. He wrote this letter to Colonel Stafford Warren at Oak Ridge requesting, quote, someone who has experience in inaugurating and maintaining proper procedures for safeguarding worker health against radioactive materials, that is, health physics. This brought Dr. Bernard Wolf to Dayton to head up their health physics works, and they were satisfied with what they were able to do. So in May of '45, they requested some more, that they were going into more production and needed more help. So June 1945, requests, they brought J.E. Bradley, John Bradley, whom I knew. He wasn't alive at this time, but I knew him from the work I had at Mound Lab. He stayed on with Monsanto. Bradley, head of the Unit 4 health group, which was the Oakwood Playhouse location. And Koval was head of the Bone Break Academy over in West Dayton. And he's listed in the 1945 group reports and for about, he was there until early 1946. I tried to find, there were a lot of people who had died from when we start looking at these people. This story came out, the first story came out in 2007 about Koval. So Ed Roach and I just tried to find, we questioned as many people as we could find who we knew had worked on this. And I only found one guy who's named Howard DeFore, who's fairly well known around. He seemed to have worked everywhere in the early days. He was at NCR a while. He was at Monsanto a while. He was the start of the new Wright State physics lab out there. So anyhow, he was getting kind of old, and I doubted his memory a bit at the time, but he claimed that he had known Koval, but he was the only one of about a half dozen or so that I was able to contact who claimed that they remembered him. Later on, there was James Shoke, who was a member of the University of Chicago SED group, and their job was to develop instrumentation for radiation detection. And he came to Dayton several times and knew Koval fairly well. And he said that he was an excellent technician, knew his job well, and was very friendly. And this is a basis from a talk he gave in 2014. I think he's since passed away because he was getting old then. So there are direct comments, and then there's the FBI file. When I get the time to do it, looking at the FBI file on the internet. There's about 2,000 pages to that's the declassified file that's on, and there are quite a few people that I remember at the Dayton project, but unfortunately, this time they were all of them I knew very well were gone. So there is direct evidence that he was here that we could identify. So, okay, so he was here when the war ended, and he stayed on till early 1946. He was discharged from there. He was still in the Army then. He's discharged from the Army at Camp Atterbury, Indiana, in early 1946. He declined a civilian job with the Dayton project. They thought he was a great worker, and they offered him a job to stay on, but he turned this down. He went back to New York City and CCNY, and he finished up on the work that he'd been studying there before and got an electrical engineering degree cum laude in February of 1948. Then in October of 48, some 6 months later, he sailed from New York City on the ocean liner SS America, saying that he was bound for Le Havre, France, with a passport for 6 months. He would travel on behalf of Atlas Trading Company, but he never returned back. Then he went on to Russia. And the FBI opened their investigation then on him in the mid-1950s. It's uncertain what really kicked off it specifically, but it was too late to catch him. He wasn't about to be transported back here with the Soviets. So, but the thing is, when he got back to Russia, he received only a minor service award. He didn't make much noise about coming back. He knew that it was a dangerous thing to get too much notoriety in Stalin's eyes. So he was discharged from the Army, took his discharge after 9 years of service. He was only an untrained rifleman, and he had academic training. He was Jewish and with a foreign background. It was difficult for him to attain a job, and he could get only menial jobs like janitorial jobs and so forth. So he didn't make any noise much about it. After Stalin's death, though, in 1953, he appealed his GRU associates, the contacts that he had, and they obtained him a low-level appointment at Mendeleev Institute where he'd gone to school. He eventually became a lecturer there. He taught courses, and he had a very successful career, really. He published approximately 100 papers and had some 20 or so graduate students that he got their degrees for, helped them get their degrees. And here's a picture of him as a graduate student and assistant in chemistry. at the Institute. And then here's another picture. The next picture is one in 1957, a photograph of the faculty member. And then it's 1969. He's starting to get gray here. He stayed on. He finally retired from there in 1986, but he stayed on several years after that, helping out other people and translating. So he had a fairly decent career as a scientific researcher. Now, since he's in his later life, though, it was mostly uneventful, at least compared to what he'd seen before. And he was fiercely independent, but respected by and adored by his nephews and nieces. He didn't have any children. His wife didn't have any children. They knew that his nieces and nephews knew that he'd worked for the GRU, but they didn't know any details about his activities. His wife died in 1999. In 2006, January 31st, he died quietly at age 92, taking most of his secrets with him to the grave. One interesting thing, and I have here a copy of the letter he wrote since he'd served in the military, like in the U.S. military, like he applied for Social Security in September 1999, and here's the copy of the letter. Says there where they say, "We're sending you application forms for Social Security benefits. If you want to apply for benefits, you need to fill out these forms and so forth." And then there's a copy of his actual application. And though in February of 2000, so about 6 months later, says just one sentence reply says, "We are writing to tell you you do not qualify for retirement benefits." And a couple of Russian language books have been written on him. They haven't been translated yet. There's one by A.P. Zhukov and one by Y.A. Lebedev. There's also a book on the GRU's activities that mentions something about him. Here's a picture of the Fat Man bomb. The U.S. had the plutonium bomb that was used in Nagasaki with shows you where the initiators is the heart of the bomb, and that conventional explosives are made to implode it and to actuate the initiator, which were called urchins. The little initiators are used, and there's a picture of the Fat Man that was actually used at Nagasaki at Tinian Island. But this was an AEC picture was taken, and then. By comparison, there's the official Soviet picture of their first atomic bomb called Joe 1. It looks like a dead ringer so they certainly copied after it. The urchin component is the idea behind the component was that polonium-210 decays with the alpha decay and goes to stable lead 206. Alpha, the particles then react with beryllium or some light metal. They use beryllium, and they form carbon and neutrons. And the idea was to use them to have a source of neutron, a reliable source of neutron in the bomb to set it off at a very critical time when they reach criticality. That was the notion behind it. They really didn't know. The Soviets had no idea, really, that we were using polonium. So this was one thing that Koval was able to reveal to them, that was a very important thing. And if you look at the history of the Dayton project, they spent about 2 years going down one blind alley trying to get polonium from the tailings of radium mining that had been done in Canada. And that turned out to be not a very good way, so they actually used the bombarded bismuth in a reactor which is the way that Fermi had found out in Rome in research in the 1930s that they employed after they built graphite piles. So this was a complete surprise. He said that must have saved them a couple of years just to find that out. And he was able to give them, by this time the successful one had been developed, how much it took, how many they had all the information on it. See, so this was a great saving of time. Well, his first award he got of significance in 2000, he was given an award for special service during World War II. And then the thing that kicked off our interest in this that I mentioned at the start, the story in 2007 that was in the New York Times. There's a picture showing President Putin handing this over to the defense posthumously handing this over for permanent display in this GRU Military Intelligence Museum, and a picture of it says under the pseudonym Delmar, George Koval was the only Soviet intelligence officer to penetrate the U.S. secret atomic facilities producing plutonium, enriched uranium, and polonium used to create the atomic bomb during the Manhattan Project. That was his information. He was able to get them about Oak Ridge, its construction, what the general outline of what they did and their approach there. Then there's he later on, after this revelation of his activities in 2007, he got quite a few other honoraria. And a memorial celebrating his centennial is shown here where Putin is presiding over this. And as they celebrate the centennial of his birth on December 7th, 2013. The impact of his spying, again, is the information was provided on the enormous resources at Site X, that's Oak Ridge, needed to enrich sufficient U-235, made the USSR pursue the route to using plutonium for the bomb. They never messed with trying to separate uranium. And the U.S. spent at least 2.5 years on this. That was their main activity. That they were going to make the bomb out of uranium to start with, and that proved really to be too much. They got, after all that time, they got enough for one bomb. But they had already converted over, and all bombs from thereafter were plutonium bombs. They didn't, because separation of the uranium was too much. That helped them out, the Soviets, tremendously. And then he furnished details on the separation and purification of, the idea that polonium-210 was used, and then furnished the details on the separation and purification of it, and how it was constructed, this successful implosion urchin, the trigger. So he, according to most people now, feels that he must have been at least half of the information must have come through Koval, and the other part was probably provided. An important part was provided by Klaus Fuchs and Ted Hall from Los Alamos, where they had the actual design of the bomb. But those were the two main things. It turns out, even though they got the death penalty, the Rosenbergs were sort of minor players in this whole thing, really. His friend Kamish from CCNY days was in the process of writing a book, and it would have probably been the most complete and revelatory book, but he died recently and didn't finish the book, so I don't know if there will be any more or not.